All right, so we just watched President Zelensky's address to the United Kingdom Parliament. If you Google, if you put in YouTube, Zelensky, UK Parliament, Sky News, you'll get to the video, and it's, I think, an important video to watch. It runs 9 minutes and 51 seconds. All right, so we are now going to go into the United Nations for just a little bit of time. Well, I can give you a choice. I thought these were two incredibly pertinent organizations at the moment, the United Nations or NATO. Who wants the United Nations? Raise your hand. NATO, raise your hand. Okay, NATO it is. I will freely admit that I downloaded this. This is not my work. This is the work of the Lithuanian Military Academy. So pretend that you are all cadets in the Lithuanian Military Academy learning about NATO. All right?
You think this one's going to have the crazy transitions?
No, I know that for a fact this one doesn't. This. So the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. What do we know about it? Any background information about NATO?
Wasn't it made in response to the Soviet Union's Warsaw Pact?
Yes, or the Warsaw Pact was made in response to NATO. I guess it depends on who you ask. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Depends on if you ask a Russian or an American that question. So pretend for today that I'm Major Minodagas Sakativius. I've had this for a little while now. I can't pronounce the name still. So Dag Hammarskjöld, who was the Secretary General of NATO, he says, peacekeeping is not a job for soldiers, but only soldiers can do it. And there's a lot of truth in that. You know, soldiers are not meant to keep peace. Soldiers are instruments of war, but only sometimes with a gun pointed at your head will you stop and listen and do what needs to be done. So only soldiers can actually keep the peace. So NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, signed on April 4th, 1949, and it's a collective organization. It's a collective defense with 28 member states. Now, NATO's a little bit different than the United Nations in that they need to reach decisions through consensus. So the Secretary General has a tougher job than, say, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations. And that he has to get up there and preside over these sessions and say, brothers, we need consensus, or brothers, sisters, we need consensus. Now, are we going to get involved and enforce a no-fly zone over Russia like President Zelensky wants? All those in favor? All those against? And I'll pretend every one of you raised their hand. So a decision would not be reached at that point, as you would all have to convince me of why I should go your way. So there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of point making. I'm sure that all practices are above board and entirely ethical to get people to give them what they want, as is with any governmental organization. 22 countries participate in this Partnership for Peace agreement. 15 other countries take part in institutionalized dialogue programs. So NATO is essentially, a defense force, again, that operates under the assumption, not under the assumption, under the dictate that an attack on one of us is an attack on all. An attack on the United Kingdom is an attack on the United States, because we've signed this treaty and are a part of this organization. So this says, I certify that the foregoing is a true copy of the North Atlantic Treaty signed at Washington on April 4th, 1949, in the English and French languages, the signed original of which is deposited in the archives of the government of the United States of America. And this slide is now available on Blackboard, if I didn't mention that. In testimony whereof I, Dean Acheson, Secretary of State of the United States, have hereunto caused the seal of the Department of State to be affixed, and my name ascribed by the authentication officer of the said department at the city of Washington. I love primary sources. I love getting my hands on old documents, any old thing. So they safeguard the freedom and security of its members through political and military means. It is a military organization. That does not mean, however, that they want to fight or that let's go to war is the first resort. All right, that's an important distinction. They try to talk it out. They try to use diplomacy. That should be really everybody's first resort. Let's talk about our problems like civilized human beings. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. So political and military means. So NATO promotes democratic values, encourages consultation and cooperation on defense, security issues to build trust, and in the long run prevent conflict. So if that doesn't work, then we go military. They're committed, and they really are, to a peaceful resolution of disputes. If the one can't be reached, it has the military capacity needed to undertake crisis management operations. So like September 11th was that the first or second time Colonel Article 5 had been triggered?
I think it was second. I think the first was Korea.
Yeah. So that was the second time that Article 5 had been triggered, which says an attack on one is an attack on all. So we mobilized pretty quickly because we were part of this, us and the forces of the alliance, to take out Saddam in Iraq. So that was because diplomatic efforts failed. They rammed planes into our government buildings. We didn't know any better at the time about who was doing what, where, and when. So we carried out that mission under Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. So we're under a UN mandate. That is also very important to especially our European partners. When I was over there, I was studying politics, obviously, so this came up a lot. Isn't what you're doing a war crime? Isn't what you're doing morally wrong? And I often had to remind my classmates that I wasn't setting U.S. foreign policy. I was a citizen, and it was my government that was doing it. But because I was the only American in the room all of the time, everything got directed at me. But the UN mandates, it would come up a lot. We don't have a UN mandate for that. The Security Council didn't sanction the invasion of Afghanistan. We went in alone. What are we thinking? And in America, you know, we're really raised not to care too much about what the UN says or does. Is that an accurate assessment, do you think? Yeah. They take the totally opposite view. Unless the UN says it's okay, we're not touching it. So, I mean, they listen, I guess. Just a different way of doing business. So NATO provides a unique opportunity for member countries to consult and take decisions on security issues at all levels and in a variety of fields. A NATO decision is the expression of the collective will of all 28 member countries, since all decisions are taken by consensus. And this is what I mean. If one country dissents, then that decision is not taken, unless that one country can be convinced that this is the correct course of action. It's not taken. They move on to some form of reconciliation. So we can get to everything, because I didn't plan on showing that address by President Zelensky, but it was important. Kaylee, just yell at me in 5 minutes to shut up. Is that okay? Well, just to tell me it's been 5 minutes, because then we need to move on to Legacy of Ashes. Can you do that? All right, thank you.
I'll give you 6 minutes.
You'll give me 6 minutes? All right, thank you. But no longer.
No.
Okay. So it is an expression of the collective will of all members. So hundreds of civilians, military experts, all sorts of officials come to NATO HQ to exchange information. They share ideas. They help prepare decisions when needed in cooperation with national delegations and the staff at NATO HQ. Up to this illegal Ukrainian invasion, it was often said a lot that NATO is an organization in search of a mission. And experts, or so-called experts, at least the talking heads and newspapers I was reading and listening to, said that this might be a chance for NATO to actually find itself, find a mission, defend Ukraine. But there are a lot of complexities that go into that, because we need to tread carefully when anybody threatens nuclear weapons. So they've been in Afghanistan, they've been in Kosovo, they run counter-piracy operations, they monitor the Mediterranean. This was, well, not that it was that long ago, but the Merkel era, 2005 to 2008-ish, when all the African refugees were coming over and landing on the shores of Greece, Italy. Anybody remembering that, or am I just going nuts? You remember that? Okay, vaguely. All right, I'm not nuts then. They support the African Union as well. So this is the working structure.